Now, I just read an article and then I come to realize that apparently the one of the three oldest professions in human history, in fact, they are as old as humanity as it is, or as civilization is. And number one is prostitution, and then there is the priest, or the grand priest, or the tribal's priest, and then you come to the other, which is the warrior. The warrior, that is also the third profession, and then you from the warrior profession, then you come to the profession of the diviner. So the diviner sort of was the the interface, the medium, or the go between the humans or his clients, the people that he was serving, and then the spirit world. And in such a way, they represented a mode or a performance of the higher function of identifying the exact direction someone needed to take. So in case someone wanted to say build a house or to take a certain move or to carry out a certain military campaign and was unsure whether it was the right moment or if victory was assured, that individual would go to a diviner, then the diviner would issue an oracle. All right. And for those of you who are familiar with the movie 300, the 300 Spartans, okay. So we also see that also the Greeks had an oracle and someone who could would speak. So how does divination work? Simply uh, through the rituals that are performed, because the careful diviner endeavors to make sure that uh, everything is so random that his technique of divination is devoid of biases. Okay, so he's trying to avoid personal beliefs being injected into his art or into his services that he's offering. So the diviner looks for certain rituals that, as much as he can, do try to eliminate personal biases. So some of them read the palms, some of them throw up objects in the air, they shuffle them around, and then depending on the way they fall, they sort of begin to make a reading and an interpretation of those objects. So there is a certain form of randomness which tries to get rid of any form of personal biases that might taint the final result. So if you've watched the movie Mr. Bones, that South African movie, it was a comedy of sort. But there is that guy was a white man, but living in a black community. And he was the priest of that land. And so he would throw bones in the air and then he would read the bones. Now, that is divination. And to him, the the messages that were extracted from the from the random arrangement of those bones, those messages were taken to be the messages of the oracle or of the great one, as they referred to him. Okay. Now, that is not just restricted to places outside the Bible, but also the Bible has its own version of objects of divination. And in this case, it is what we call the ephod, ephod, the ephod. It was a vesture that had certain it had names, stones engraved with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. And then there were also other stones, sparkling or shining stones, the thummim and the urim. And these ones were used to divine uh, certain forms of the two forms of God's will. So there was the absolute, and then there was the permissive, like an opinion, Okay, so and an individual would approach this object or would call for the effort to be brought to them, because we see it with King David. King David, when he was in his wars, for example, when when they took his wives and his children, a certain group took his wives and his children. So he calls Abiathar and tells him, "You bring to me the effort." And King David, you know, inquires of God that should I pursue? And then the object, that is the effort, indicated to him that God's answer was yes, pursue. Then he further asked that will I recover everything? And still the answer said yes. So he was using the effort to divine God's will and God's mind at that time, or what God would have him to do. And it was a constant feature throughout the life of King David. Okay, and perhaps that is the reason why I strongly believe that that is the reason why he never made a lot of mistakes, and that's why he had stellar moments of victory and great moments. Okay, now let's break this down. So first, there is a ritual or certain objects that someone is trying to create. Okay, and then those objects, behind them there is a spirit, and then that spirit communicates through these objects. And why does the spirit have to communicate through influencing the orientation of these objects? It's because of the limitation of the human flesh. It takes a certain kind of skill and dedicating a man's spirit and a man's heart to be able to access the realms of the spirit. That's what prophets do. So prophets have their spirits gifted in such a manner that at anyone's moment they can get into a state and they either see a vision or they receive the word of God. So assuming a prophet is operating as a nabi, so to a nabi, he receives inspiration. The word of God comes into their spirit because God is a spirit. So there is a way their spirits have been educated in such a manner that they can hear things from the realms of the spirit. So, and this is not only limited to hearing the voice of God, but even uh, prophets or diviners and the spirit mediums and spiritists and all that kind of group, or card readers and what have you. All they are doing is they are trying to interface with a higher realm that influences the events that go on in life. And that higher realm is the spirit realm. So they launch out in the realms of the spirit and then they get an answer from that realm and then they communicate that answer. That's all there is to divination. And let no one lie to you. Let no one lie to you. People everywhere, whether it is executives in the Silicon Valley, people are relying on diviners, spiritists. They are relying on these individuals to tell them the next moves, where to invest, what to do. I read an article about a certain young woman who became so wealthy, and because she became a spiritist, she became a sangoma, and so she traveled to the United States, and she made a huge amount of money. In fact, so much so that they wrote an article about her in CNBC. CNBC, make it, and that was her business because the desire to know what to do and the desire to remove ambiguities, the desire to remove uncertainties from the actions that we are going to take next has been as ancient as humanity as it is, although people now tend to be more scientific and what have you. But that desire is what fuels the services of the diviners, the services of the spirit mediums, the spiritists, and all that kind of stuff. And so the biblical the biblical example is in the effort. So David consults that object. And today we have the sangomas, today we have the mediums, the witches, the magicians, and all that circle of individuals, and all that circle of individuals. And these individuals, they speak into the lives of people. But there is a difference between biblical divination and then divination that is without God. Because the moment you do divination without God, obviously you are interfacing with the spirit, and that spirit will keep on directing your life. And in fact, very many societies have survived like that. Okay, so through divination, to know the next move, to know what is to be done next. Okay, and they have survived like that, and it is how they have resolved certain conundrums or certain challenges they have had in their societies. Let's say someone has a dispute with another individual, and they would like to know, or the leader or the chiefs of that community, the leaders of that community would like to know who exactly did what, because apparently somehow these individuals who are before them are very good at denying what they did, and so they cannot tell exactly. Then enter the diviner, and then the diviner enlists the services of a spirit that is assumed to know what happened, and then that spirit communicates through the different rituals that they perform. But now, that is it, basically. So, also, the biblical approach was in the same manner and in the same vein, that God would communicate through the effort, would communicate his mind through the effort, as we have seen with the example of King David, and not just King David, but even the priests and the subsequent prophets, and quite different in that instead of relying on the effort, the objects, the shiny stones to reveal the mind of God, the prophet communicates because he is able to gain access to the realms of the spirit with his spirit. So either it is through uh, through either it is through okay, let's use the example of the prophet the prophet Elijah. Now Elijah is quite no Elisha is quite very interesting. So one time they come up to him and they find him. He was not in the mood to prophesy or to speak or to do anything. He was just minding his business. But these kings, that was Jehoshaphat, Ahab, and another king, an Edomite king, they come to him and then they like, you see, the Lord has delivered this great company, and there is no water for the great company, and therefore we might just be destroyed. Okay, so Elijah, for a moment, he first resists and he says that, why don't you go to the gods of your fathers? He was talking to Ahab. And then he tells him that if it weren't for Jehoshaphat, who was a God fearing man, I wouldn't have even had the time to look at you. I wouldn't have even considered you. So Elisha then calls for a minstrel, someone to play music. And when they played music, Elijah fell into an ecstatic state. In other words, into a higher realm of awareness and consciousness, where he could interface with the Spirit of God and with God in the realms of the Spirit. And then Elijah began to prophesy, and he told them that you go and make holes in that place, and so on and so on and so forth. And then water shall come, and you shall have enough for yourselves and for your animals to drink. And it was so, as Elijah had prophesied. So they had water. And then he said, more than that, I'm also going to give you victory over that king that you're going to fight against. And it was so, and that's how it happened. So the prophet had to get into a certain state of consciousness and mind and awareness and awareness. And it is exactly what happened. Someone has said, Musanga Farah. Hi, Musanga. He said hi. Okay. Yes, Celestine, you're welcome. Thank you for passing by and saying hi. So, and then God spoke to them and he ministered. So, now when it comes to divination, is it relevant for our day and even for your personal life? Is it, do you want to know what to do next? Do you want to understand what to do next, or what next year will bring, or what is going to happen in the world? Do you want to know? Okay. Because in the Old Testament, as I said earlier, we see the ephod and the Urim. And that one served for a season when there were no prophets. But when the prophets came on the scene, when the ministry of the prophets began, you know, most importantly, at a time of after the judges, when the days of the judges were over, so came the ministry of the prophets. All right. Of course, the prophets were also around that time, but it was heralded mostly by Samuel. And so we see a steady movement away from using the effort to do divination, to understand the mind of God, or to know what God was saying concerning a certain situation or a certain circumstance that someone was plagued with. And then we see that we come to the era of prophets. So prophets like the prophet Samuel, of whom it is said that God never let a single word from his mouth fall to the ground. In other words, there was fulfillment of everything that the man spoke about. Okay, and so the prophets. Now, the prophet, as I've explained, the case of Elisha, is able to interface with the realms of the spirit. It's the same thing with the tarot card readers, same thing with the ouiji boards, the same thing with the palm readers, the root dividers. It is the same thing with all of them. But the danger, where is the danger? The actual danger lies in the ritual of divination. Okay, divination. So, what is the accepted biblical way of receiving communication from God? Of course, the prophet is still relevant in the church, but if you're going to communicate with God and not be duped by uh, the weird spirit, as happens with people who go to mediums and to witches and to sangomas and spirit men, men who stay in seclusion in hidden places and speak from there, and then they utter their voices and they do their enchantments. The diviners. If you're not going to be duped by the spirits that operate behind those individuals, you have to know that God, you have to understand that even today, God can speak to you. He can speak to you. He can talk to you about your business. He can talk to you about your marriage. He can talk to you about your life. He can tell you what is going to happen tomorrow in the markets everywhere. You can get to know. So the accepted biblical way is a prayer. Have the expectation that God will talk to you. Now that is hard for very many people, and who are not experienced in deciphering the voice of God and knowing what God is saying. The other is you wait until you sleep, and when you're dreaming, and then somehow you come to see a dream, and then that information. Now the problem with that is that it is slow. Then the other alternative is to seek out a prophet. There are people who are gifted prophets, who are true prophets. Okay, they are true prophets, and they have the word of God for you. They can speak to you. Okay, that is also that other way. But the easiest for you to hear the voice of God is to actually ask. And if you are unsure, then also seek confirmation from someone else. All right. Now, the sum of this matter is the diviner who is doing divination, who is prophesying, is merely a medium, is an interface between you and the spirit that he represents. So the tarot card reader, the ouija board, the spirits behind those things are not the spirit of God. They are spirits of divination, fallen angels. And so, woe unto you if you begin to get a directional advice from individuals like that. They're telling you, do ABC and all that kind of stuff. And what happens is that the moment that you open up yourself to accessing direction and instruction from those spirits, is that they gain the legal ground, the legal right to operate in your life. They gain. So they will begin to influence the events in your life. And as true to nature and to character of Lucifer, this season may you not go out without help, but may the Lord